I still remember the day Marcus and I shook hands on our dream of building a maritime empire together, two brothers from Portland, Oregon, with nothing but determination and a shared vision of conquering the shipping industry. We complemented each other perfectly back then. I handled the technical side, the logistics, the nitty-gritty details that kept our boats running smoothly. Marcus took care of the money, the legal stuff, expanding our reach across the Pacific coast. For 12 years, we built Hartwell Maritime from absolutely nothing into a fleet of 37 vessels, but I never thought the brother I trusted with my life would become the person who would try to destroy everything we created together. The day he made his decision changed both our lives forever. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and unexpected revenge, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Are you someone who has ever trusted family and business? Drop a comment below and let me know. Also, if you are ready to hear how I turned the tables on my own brother using something he never knew I owned, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this journey is about to get very intense. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Marcus and I founded Hartwell Maritime 12 years ago in my garage in Portland. I was 26, he was 29, and we had this crazy idea that two guys with no money could compete with the big shipping companies. Those first years were brutal. We worked 18-hour days, lived off ramen noodles and cheap coffee, and put every single dollar back into the business. Our first boat was a beat-up cargo vessel we bought at auction for $40,000. I spent 3 months rebuilding that engine with my own hands, while Marcus handled the paperwork and found our first clients. The division of labor came naturally. I understood machines, ocean currents, fuel efficiency, and port operations. Marcus had this gift for numbers, contracts, and reading people. He could walk into a room full of executives and come out with a deal that made everyone happy. By our third year, we had 5 boats. By our 7th year, we had 22 vessels and were pulling in $15 million annually. We went public on the NASDAQ 5 years ago, and suddenly we were worth $230 million on paper. But here is the thing nobody knew, not even Marcus. 5 years ago, I made what I thought was a smart, strategic decision. I realized that controlling the docks where our ships loaded and unloaded cargo was just as important as owning the ships themselves. So, I used my personal savings, about $4.2 million, to quietly purchase Pacific Harbor Complex. This was a cluster of 3 mid-sized ports along the Oregon and Northern California coast that handled specialized cargo operations. I set up the purchase through a separate company I created called Coastal Logistics LLC. As far as Marcus knew, I just had really good relationships with the port managers. He never questioned why we always got the best rates and priority scheduling at these 3 locations. These ports handled 78% of our cargo operations, but Marcus assumed we were just regular customers paying standard fees. The decision to keep this secret was not about hiding anything malicious. I figured it was just smart business diversification. If shipping ever got tough, we would have steady income from port operations. Plus, I wanted to surprise Marcus someday with this additional asset when the timing was right. Everything started changing about 18 months ago when Marcus hired Patricia Goldman as our strategic consultant. She came from one of those big East Coast consulting firms, wore expensive suits, and had this way of making everything sound more complicated than it needed to be. Suddenly, Marcus was having meetings I was not invited to. He started talking about restructuring, optimizing our corporate governance, and bringing in outside investors to accelerate growth. I trusted my brother completely, so when he started making decisions without consulting me, I figured he knew what he was doing. We had always worked well together, and I assumed this was just part of growing into a bigger company, but I started noticing small changes. Marcus became more formal with me, less likely to grab a beer after work and talk about our plans. The easy camaraderie we had built over 12 years was slowly disappearing. The first major decision Marcus made without my input was signing an exclusive shipping contract with Meridian Shipping, a company we had competed against for years. This contract committed 60% of our fleet capacity to their routes for the next 3 years. When I found out about it during a routine operations meeting, I was shocked. The rates were decent, but it locked us into serving just one client for most of our business. When I asked Marcus about it privately, he said Patricia had convinced him it would provide stable revenue and make us more attractive to potential investors. Investors. This was the first time Marcus had mentioned bringing in outside money since we went public. We were profitable, growing steadily, and had plenty of cash flow. Why did we need investors? Then, Marcus dropped another bomb. He announced that we needed to restructure our leadership roles to be more attractive to institutional investors. He would become Chief Executive Officer, and I would be Chief Operating Officer. On paper, it looked like a lateral move, but in reality, it meant Marcus would have final authority over all major decisions. When I objected, he said it was just titles and paperwork, that nothing would really change between us, but everything changed. Marcus started making unilateral decisions about route planning, fleet maintenance schedules, and even which employees we hired or fired. Some of these decisions directly contradicted strategies we had developed together over years of experience. When I pushed back, Marcus would say I was being resistant to change and that we needed to think bigger. The breaking point came when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Marcus and Patricia Goldman. I had stayed late at the office to review some maintenance reports when I heard voices coming from Marcus's office. The door was slightly open, and I could clearly hear them discussing something called Phase 2. Patricia was explaining to Marcus that once they removed me from the executive team, they could move forward with selling the company to Northern Seas Corporation, a massive shipping conglomerate based in Seattle. Marcus would receive a golden parachute worth $12 million, and Patricia would get a finder's fee of $2.5 million. They talked about me like I was just an obstacle to be removed, not a co-founder who had built this company with my bare hands. I felt sick listening to them discuss how Marcus would gradually push me out by questioning my decisions in front of other executives and making me look incompetent. The plan was to create a narrative that I was holding the company back from reaching its full potential. Then, once I was gone, Marcus would have a clear path to sell everything we had built to Northern Seas Corporation. When I confronted Marcus that same night, he did not even try to deny it. We stood in his office at 11:30 p.m., and I asked him directly if he was planning to sell our company. He looked at me with this cold expression I had never seen before and said, "Art, you are thinking too small. We have an opportunity to cash out and set ourselves up for life. Northern Seas wants our routes and our client relationships. They are offering $340 million. I asked him what would happen to our employees, to the legacy we had built, to the promise we made to each other all those years ago. Marcus just shrugged and said, "Business is business, Art. You are too sentimental. That is why you cannot see the big picture." In that moment, I realized my brother had become someone I did not recognize. The Marcus, who used to stay up all night helping me rebuild engines, had been replaced by someone who saw everything, including our relationship, as just another transaction. The end came faster than I expected. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Marcus called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. We had 7 board members total: Marcus, myself, Patricia Goldman, and 4 outside investors who had joined when we went public. I walked into that conference room thinking we were going to discuss the quarterly earnings report. Instead, Marcus announced that the board needed to make some difficult decisions about the future leadership of the company. He said that he and I had fundamental disagreements about the direction of Hartwell Maritime, and that these disagreements were preventing the company from reaching its full potential. Patricia Goldman then presented what she called a restructuring plan that would streamline decision-making and eliminate conflicting leadership philosophies. The 4 outside board members had clearly been lobbied by Marcus before this meeting. One by one, they expressed their concerns about having co-founders with different visions running the company. They talked about the need for clear, unified leadership. Then Marcus made his motion to remove me from all executive positions and buy out my shares at book value, which was significantly less than what the company was actually worth. I tried to defend myself to explain that our disagreements were normal business discussions, not fundamental conflicts. But Marcus had orchestrated this perfectly. He had planted seeds of doubt about my leadership abilities for months, and now he was harvesting the results. The vote was 5-2 against me. Even I could not vote for myself because the motion was specifically about removing me from leadership. Security escorted me out of the building that same afternoon. 12 years of building something from nothing, and I was not even allowed to pack my personal belongings from my office. They said someone would box up my things and mail them to me. As I walked to my truck in the parking lot, I saw Marcus watching me from his office window. He did not wave goodbye. That night, sitting in my kitchen with a beer and a pile of legal documents, I started thinking about what I actually owned versus what I thought I owned. My shares in Hartwell Maritime were gone, sold back to the company at a price that was legal but far below market value. But then I remembered something Marcus had forgotten about completely. I pulled out the incorporation documents for Coastal Logistics LLC and the purchase agreements for Pacific Harbor Complex. Marcus had never been involved in this transaction, and his name appeared nowhere on any of the paperwork. As far as the law was concerned, I personally owned 3 critical ports that handled nearly 80% of Hartwell Maritime's cargo operations. I spent the next 2 days reviewing every contract, every lease agreement, every legal document related to these ports. The more I read, the more I realized how powerful my position actually was. Hartwell Maritime had been operating under month-to-month port agreements with Coastal Logistics for 5 years. Marcus assumed these were just standard commercial arrangements with independent port operators. He had no idea that every dollar in port fees his company paid was actually going directly into my personal bank account through Coastal Logistics. Without access to Pacific Harbor Complex, Hartwell Maritime would have to find alternative ports for 78% of their cargo operations. The nearest comparable facilities were in San Francisco and Los Angeles, which would add significant costs and logistical complications to every shipping route. More importantly, those ports were already operating at near capacity, so Hartwell Maritime would be competing with much larger companies for scheduling slots. I realized that Marcus and Patricia had made their plans based on incomplete information. Northern Seas Corporation was paying $340 million for a shipping company that they assumed had secure long-term access to the ports it needed to operate. But that access could disappear with 30 days' notice, which was exactly what the contract stipulated. I contacted my personal attorney, David Chen, and asked him to prepare termination notices for all port agreements between Coastal Logistics and Hartwell Maritime. The legal language was simple, effective, 30 days from the date of notice. Hartwell Maritime would no longer have access to Pacific Harbor Complex facilities. David asked me if I was sure about this decision because it would essentially cripple the company that Marcus was trying to sell. I told David I was absolutely sure. Marcus wanted to play hardball business tactics, so I would show him what real leverage looked like. But I decided to wait for the perfect moment to reveal my hand. That perfect moment came exactly 6 weeks later. Northern Seas Corporation officially announced their acquisition of Hartwell Maritime in a press release that appeared in the Wall Street Journal and several shipping industry publications. The article quoted Marcus talking about how excited he was to join a larger organization and expand Hartwell Maritime's reach across the Pacific. There was a photograph of Marcus and Patricia Goldman shaking hands with the Northern Seas executives at some fancy restaurant in Seattle. I waited until the morning after the press release to send the port termination notices. I had David deliver them personally to Marcus's office, with copies sent to Northern Seas Corporation and Patricia Goldman. The legal documents were very clear. Coastal Logistics LLC was exercising its right to terminate all agreements with Hartwell Maritime effective 30 days from receipt of notice. My phone started ringing within 2 hours. The first call was from Marcus, and he sounded panicked in a way I had never heard before. He was asking me what the hell was going on, who was Coastal Logistics, and why some company he had never heard of was cutting off access to the ports we had been using for years. I told Marcus we needed to meet in person to discuss the situation. He wanted to meet at the Hartwell Maritime offices, but I insisted on meeting at my attorney's office instead. I wanted everything documented properly, and I wanted witnesses to whatever conversation we were about to have. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. the following day. Marcus showed up with Patricia Goldman and 2 executives from Northern Seas Corporation that I had never met before. David Chen represented me, along with another attorney who specialized in maritime law. The tension in that conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I started the meeting by introducing myself to the Northern Seas executives and explaining that I was the former co-founder of Hartwell Maritime and the current owner of Pacific Harbor Complex through Coastal Logistics LLC. I showed them the incorporation documents, the purchase agreements, and 5 years of financial records proving that I had owned these ports throughout the entire time that Marcus was building his business plan around them. The Northern Seas executives were clearly shocked. Their lead negotiator, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, asked Marcus directly how this was possible. She said their due diligence process had identified Pacific Harbor Complex as a critical asset for Hartwell Maritime's operations, but Marcus had assured them that the company had secure long-term agreements with these facilities. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. He kept staring at the documents I had spread across the conference table, and I could see him trying to figure out how he had missed something so important. Patricia Goldman was frantically taking notes and whispering calculations under her breath. I let them absorb the information for a few minutes, then I explained the business implications. Without access to Pacific Harbor Complex, Hartwell Maritime would need to find alternative port facilities for 78% of its cargo operations. The closest comparable ports were already operating at capacity and would charge significantly higher fees. This would increase operating costs by at least 20% and would require renegotiating most of the shipping contracts that made Hartwell Maritime attractive to Northern Seas in the first place. Jennifer Walsh asked me directly what it would take to maintain access to the ports. I told her that Coastal Logistics was no longer interested in doing business with Hartwell Maritime under any circumstances. However, I would be willing to discuss selling Pacific Harbor Complex to a qualified buyer who could demonstrate the financial resources and operational expertise to manage these facilities properly. Marcus immediately asked how much I wanted for the ports. I told him I would need to have the facilities professionally appraised, but based on their current revenue and strategic value, I estimated the sale price would be somewhere between $40 and $50 million. The Northern Seas executives started whispering among themselves, clearly trying to figure out if they could afford to pay Marcus for Hartwell Maritime and then pay me for the ports they needed to make the company viable. After about 20 minutes of quiet discussion, Jennifer Walsh announced that Northern Seas Corporation was withdrawing their offer to purchase Hartwell Maritime. She said they had based their valuation on the assumption that the company had secure access to critical infrastructure, and without that access, the deal no longer made financial sense. They would honor any contracts already signed, but they would not be moving forward with the acquisition. Marcus and Patricia Goldman were devastated. Their $12 million golden parachute had just evaporated, and they were left with a company that had significant debt from the expansion they had funded in preparation for the sale. Worse, they had already spent money on legal fees, consulting fees, and other costs related to the acquisition that they now would not be able to recover. But I was not finished yet. I told the group that while Coastal Logistics was not interested in working with the current management of Hartwell Maritime, I would be willing to make an offer to purchase the company myself. Given the operational challenges the company would face without access to Pacific Harbor Complex, I felt that a fair offer would be 30% above book value payable over 3 years. This offer was actually more generous than what Marcus had received when they forced me out, but it was substantially less than what he would have made from the Northern Seas deal. More importantly, my offer came with the condition that I would have complete operational control of the company, and that neither Marcus nor Patricia Goldman would have any ongoing role in the business. Marcus asked for time to consider the offer, but Jennifer Walsh pointed out that time was not on his side. Word would spread quickly through the shipping industry that Hartwell Maritime had lost access to its primary port facilities. Clients would start canceling contracts, and the company's value would decline rapidly. My offer might be the best option available, even though it was far from what Marcus had originally hoped to achieve. The meeting ended with Marcus agreeing to seriously consider my proposal. As everyone was packing up their documents, Marcus asked if we could speak privately. David Chen advised me not to have any conversations without legal representation present, but I agreed to a brief discussion in the hallway outside the conference room. Marcus looked exhausted and defeated. He asked me how long I had been planning this and whether I had set him up from the beginning. I told him honestly that I had never planned any of this. I bought the ports 5 years ago as a smart business decision, not as a weapon to use against him someday. But when he decided to push me out of the company we built together, he forced me to use every advantage I had to protect myself. He apologized for the way he had handled things and said he had let Patricia Goldman and the potential payout from Northern Seas cloud his judgment. He asked if there was any way we could work together again, maybe with him staying on as a consultant or regional manager. I looked at my brother, this person who had shared my dreams for 12 years before betraying me for money, and I realized that our relationship could never go back to what it used to be. I told Marcus that I would be fair in the buyout negotiations and that I would make sure all the employees kept their jobs, but I could not trust him to be part of the leadership team anymore. Business might be business, like he had said, but trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt with contracts and handshakes. 3 weeks later, I became the sole owner of both Hartwell Maritime and Pacific Harbor Complex. The total cost was less than what Northern Seas had originally offered Marcus, and I had financed the purchase using the ports as collateral. Marcus and Patricia Goldman both left the company, and I brought in Sarah Mitchell, a marine engineer I had worked with years earlier, to help me restructure the operations. The first few months were challenging. I had to rebuild relationships with clients who were nervous about the change in ownership, and I had to prove that I could run the entire operation without Marcus. But gradually, things started improving. Without the pressure to maximize short-term profits for a potential sale, I could focus on building sustainable growth and treating our employees fairly. I also discovered that owning both the shipping company and the ports created opportunities I had never considered before. We could offer integrated logistics services to clients handling their cargo from origin to final delivery. This allowed us to charge premium rates while actually providing better service than our competitors. Today, 3 years later, Hartwell Maritime is more profitable than it ever was when Marcus and I ran it together. We have 42 vessels now, and Pacific Harbor Complex has been expanded to include specialized facilities for container shipping and bulk cargo operations. Sarah has become my business partner, and we have built the kind of collaborative relationship that I thought I had with Marcus. The hardest part of this whole experience was not the business challenge or the legal complications. It was losing my brother. For months after everything was settled, I felt angry and betrayed. I had trusted Marcus completely, and he had chosen money over our relationship. Some nights I would lie awake wondering if I could have handled things differently or if there was something I could have said to change his mind. But gradually, I learned that you cannot control other people's choices. You can only control how you respond to those choices. Marcus made his decision based on what he thought would make him wealthy quickly. I made my decisions based on protecting what we had built together and ensuring that our employees and clients were treated fairly. I have not spoken to Marcus since the day I bought the company from him. I heard through mutual friends that he moved to Arizona and started a small logistics consulting business. Patricia Goldman went back to her consulting firm in New York. Sometimes I wonder if they think about what might have been different if they had just been honest with me from the beginning. The biggest lesson I learned from this experience is that preparation and patience are more powerful than anger or revenge. I did not set out to destroy Marcus or take everything away from him, but when he forced me into a corner, I was ready with options he had never considered. The ports I bought 5 years earlier as a smart business investment became the foundation for rebuilding my entire career. I also learned that family relationships in business require the same level of professionalism and clear communication as any other partnership. Just because someone is your brother does not mean you can take shortcuts with contracts, decision-making, or mutual respect. Marcus and I should have had clearer agreements about our roles and responsibilities from the beginning. Most importantly, I learned that you can recover from betrayal and build something even better than what you lost. Losing Marcus as a business partner was devastating, but it forced me to develop skills and relationships I might never have pursued otherwise. Sarah and I have created a company culture focused on transparency and shared success, which has made Hartwell Maritime stronger than it ever was before. Sometimes the best business decisions come from the heart, not just the spreadsheet. When I chose to buy those ports 5 years ago, I was thinking with my heart about building something lasting. When Marcus chose to sell the company, he was thinking with his spreadsheet about maximizing immediate profit. In the end, the heart proved to be the better, long-term strategy. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself in business? What would you have done in my situation? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and building something better from the ashes. Share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges in their family business relationships. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes your greatest setbacks can become your greatest comebacks if you stay patient and keep your integrity intact.